the goal of the strategy and the title for the document is Forging a Climate Resilient Europe. And that's, you can see that we're already not in the title itself, not talking about the union only, because one of the big realizations of the strategy is that we need to be resilient together. So we have taken a very international view of adaptation, and this has quite a bit of relevance also for the countries joining us today. I don't need to go into a lot of detail about the need for such an adaptation strategy. We are among adaptation experts, people who are convinced of the need. I've already noted down some of the examples that I've heard, for instance, from Ukraine, about flooding in Western Ukraine followed by drought. This is the reality. So you all know that the impacts are already with us. We're not talking about distant in the future. We're not talking about climate impacts in exotic locations anymore. These impacts, the climate change, has come to Europe, has come to continental Europe as well. And they are affecting every single region in Europe. It's not a matter of only the Mediterranean having more drought, but it's really across the entire continent. We have more water, we have too few water, too little water, we have extreme events, we have slow onset events like sea level rise and coastal degradation. So really everybody is affected. And something that's very important to remember is that even in the best case scenario on mitigation, if we reduce even all the emissions today, these climate change impacts are already with us for the next decades because of the inertia. So it's no longer a case of going back to business as usual. We can no longer hope that after the current flood or after the current heat wave, things will go back to the way they were before. That's not the case. And you can see here that the annual and summer and winter temperatures are all shifting red everywhere, even in the low or medium emission scenario. So we are all getting hotter, and we are all in need to adapt because of this. One word on the context. We've already heard the European Green Deal as the European Union's strategy for sustainable growth. It is a growth strategy, and the adaptation strategy of the EU really fits. It's not something isolated, not something that we do just for the sake of adaptation, but it is something that really comes into play in a coherent way with a lot of other initiatives. So first was the Sustainable Development Goals, then the Paris Agreement, which has a global goal on adaptation. Article 7 of the Paris Agreement sets the scene and the need and the ways in which we need to collectively become more resilient to climate change. And inside the Green Deal, we have positioned adaptation as one part of the puzzle, together with a lot of other initiatives, basically all of the initiatives in the Green Deal. The most important such puzzle piece is the European Climate Law, which puts into law the fact that the European Union as a whole will have to be climate neutral by 2050. But the climate law already gives a climate resilience vision as well. For the first time, it puts equal emphasis on adaptation. And that is the source, and that is the basis for the adaptation strategy as well. But we have adaptation in the European Climate Pact as well, which is an initiative to engage with citizens and to empower citizens and cities and companies to work together on climate action. There is an adaptation component there as well. There's an adaptation component in the biodiversity strategy for the Union, in the agriculture strategy as well, in the emissions reductions by 2030, And there will be in the upcoming, they will be adopted this year, a new EU forest strategy and a sustainable finance strategy. So we are working together. Adaptation is everywhere, and we are really mainstreaming it. I've heard this word already used by several of the countries. So we see adaptation as not just the adaptation strategy on its own, but as part of a much bigger portfolio of actions. It really needs to be a whole government approach, because adaptation and the climate impacts are influencing and impacting every single policy that the European Union is in charge of, from gender equality to competition to buildings. The renovation wave is another important initiative, the Green Deal, where adaptation is present. Really to innovation and to even democracy and the legitimacy of elections is important because of climate change. So just a brief word on the process so far. Marcus already mentioned that the strategy was adopted 1 month ago, but as I said already, this builds on our experience so far and all the learning and all the exchanges we've had, including with your countries so far. So from 2013, we evaluated in 2018 the strategy. The evaluation was rather positive, but it showed the limits of what the 2013 strategy could do. Then last year, we published a blueprint of the strategy, and we had a very inclusive open public consultation where over 1,000 people responded. We had a huge interest from citizens themselves, and this signaled to us that really adaptation is an issue that concerns citizens as well. So it's no longer something that only cities do, urban planning, or only governments do, but it's really something that individuals as well would like to know. For instance, how to adapt if they have farms or if they have gardens in the cities. How can they can protect themselves from heat waves? How can they protect their houses from floods? So it's really something. It has come a long way from 2013 in terms of awareness, in terms of visibility, in terms of also of interest from citizens. And as you all know as well, in addition to the floods in Ukraine, to the heat waves in Moldova, we have constantly on the news these horrible climate impacts that happen globally. From Australia, these forest fires. So people are exposed to them and they are becoming much more aware of the dangers of climate change. Forest fires in California. We had this massive freezing in Texas, also a month ago, which showed the importance of preparing infrastructure as well, not just cities, but also gas pipelines, oil pipelines as well, to the fluctuations of the climate. We had a very important impact assessment as well to really look in detail at the different options we could take for the strategy and the impacts that they would have. And also the Portuguese presidency of the European Union Council showed a lot of priority for the strategy and has decided to adopt council conclusions. So the member states of the union will also take an official position on the strategy already in June. So in a very accelerated schedule, signaling the importance of the strategy. This is just a map of Europe with the word cloud of the strategy. You can see adaptation really one of the main words there, but also support, increased financial planning, impacts, solutions, a very big word you can see over Scandinavia. It's really about planning, about examples, about learning. Global is also very big. So you see already in the words that the strategy takes a very broad view of adaptation. This is a brief overview. The vision comes from the Paris Agreement and the EU climate law, and sets for 2050 a vision of a climate resilient society fully adapted to the unavoidable impacts of climate change. Fully adapted does not mean that there will not be impacts in 2050, but that we as a society will be able to resist and to even profit from these changes and from these storms and droughts and floods, we will build back better every time. And the objectives are very somehow simple to remember, but very powerful as well. Smarter, more systemic and faster adaptation, and also international action. I'll briefly go through them very quickly and spend a few more minutes on the international side, which is perhaps of more importance, but please note that the whole strategy is really an open-ended way, and there are resources and possibilities for collaboration open to all partners. And a lot of the solutions that we are developing for the EU strategy will be open and free and available for others as well if they are interested. So on smarter adaptation, we wanted first to push the frontiers of adaptation knowledge. We are already funding a lot of research into adaptation, and I'm sure that some of your universities or research centers in your countries are collaborating with EU companies and universities on adaptation projects. These are quite important and have made a lot of progress, but it is more important to do a lot more. We will also do a lot more on the modeling so that we can better predict the kind of impacts that would happen. The ambition for modeling would be to have asset level modeling results. So at the level of a house, at the level of a factory, that you would know that in 10 or 20 years you can expect, to be flooded 2 times per year or 3 times per year, and so on, so that you can better protect yourself. We will do a lot more to increase the availability of data on climate impacts, in particular on from insurance companies. These in the cases where the goods and the properties are insured, the insurance companies know very well the frequency with which these assets are being hit. And we would also get a lot more of this data from the public sector as well, because again, a lot of the properties, a lot of the buildings are not insured. They're in the public sector. So think about schools being flooded. So this will improve our understanding of what kind of impacts we have now. In the EU, this number is really huge. It's 12 billion on average per year. So it will at least 12 billion will improve the understanding of what we have now and what we can expect in the future. And we will use climate adapt. And again, I think quite a few of your countries are participating under the European Environment Agency and have the benefit of this very important platform. We will make it much more accessible. We will have, for instance, translations of a lot of the knowledge that is there. We'll facilitate exchanges and bring in more databases to this one or first stop shop for adaptation knowledge. And very importantly, already one of the actions of the strategy was delivered. The new European Climate and Health Observatory on Climate Adapt on this platform will vastly improve the knowledge of adaptation and health. This has been rather underdeveloped area so far. The link between climate change and health has not been very well established on the research side, but on the policy side either. There is a lot better in preparations for heat waves, for instance, and one of the examples that we always give is the 2003 heat wave, which in France made tens of thousands of victims. But the one in 2019, actually, there was a double heat wave in 2019, and there were 10 times fewer casualties because of the preparation and the knowledge that took place in between. So this is something that you will be able to get through the Climate and Health Observatory, and much more in terms of allergies, in terms of mosquitoes, coming up north as the climate changes and as it becomes hotter. They will bring in malaria and all of these exotic diseases that we don't even know how to pronounce these days, but that they will become a reality very soon. Then in terms of systemic adaptation, this is actually a very important message, and one of the big novelties, I've already mentioned it. We need to tackle adaptation in a systemic way, not just adaptation for the sake of adaptation, but to bring together a lot of actions at the same time. So one of the areas in which we will act is to improve adaptation strategies and plans. We will have more guidance, which of course you can also benefit from. We will also foster a lot of local and individual, I mentioned individual action already, but also just resilience, the justice aspects of resilience, the distributional aspects, the fact that today the richest among us can afford to have well-protected buildings, or can basically fly out if there is a forest fire. But this is not enough. We are as resilient as a society as the most vulnerable among us. And we need to understand where those vulnerabilities are. We need to understand which areas in a city are most vulnerable to flooding, for instance, and see if the residents in that part, it might be one of the poorest parts of a city, if they need special help or they need special communication. They might not speak the language in which early warnings are communicated. So a lot of justice, social justice aspects, and we will do a lot more on that. And the reskilling and training to allow those in sectors that are affected, like agriculture or tourism, to move to green growth sectors like green energy, sustainable action, sustainable tourism, and so on. The macroeconomic aspects of adaptation will for the first time be looked at. As I mentioned, it's very systemic. We need to look at the impacts of these droughts, of these floods on GDP. We need to better plan in terms of GDP reserves for how to help regions that are massively flooded or that suffer from droughts. And these all have impacts on fiscal policy. So we will do a lot more on that as well. And nature-based solutions, I'm sure you all know about them. These are very effective ways to not only adapt, but also to reduce emissions, to create sustainable tourism jobs, to create, to clean the air, to clean the water, all in one go. So a lot of nature restoration, floodplain restoration. We will do a lot more to help finance them, to help have more of them in Europe. And I think this is really receiving a lot of support also at the international level, a lot of interest in nature-based solutions because they are so effective and they help in so many ways in a systemic fashion. Then in terms of faster adaptation, this was a priority because there has been a lot of planning, and the event today is about national adaptation plans and to design and to update your strategies. But beyond that, we need to act as well. And in the EU, at least, the analysis that the European Environment Agency has done shows that there is a lot of planning, there is a lot of policy thinking, but in terms of actual action, in terms of the building of green roofs and green walls, in terms of enlarging your sewage system to be able to absorb a lot of the flooding that is happening. All of this is lagging behind. It's not really taking place as much as it should. So that is why we want to accelerate adaptation and come from planning to action. So one of the big actions there will be the rollout of adaptation solutions. So we'll do a lot more to develop solutions, to develop apps for farmers, for individual city planners to be able to adapt. And we will have from Horizon Europe, the EU research program, we will have something called a mission, which is inspired by the moon landing that the Americans did in the 60s, to really set a target and direct a lot of funding and a lot of policy for it. And one of the 5 missions of Horizon Europe will be on adaptation. So that will be really about scaling up and bringing solutions and demonstrating solutions in a lot of regions in Europe, and then bringing those solutions also internationally. We will do a lot to work with insurers, as I mentioned before, to bring the insurers and the beneficiaries together, to have dialogues, maybe to increase the incentives to protect. If you build a building that is already climate proof, then the insurance that you pay for that building should be decreased. So that is the kind of collaboration that we will get by bringing the insurers and the real estate sector, for instance, together. And then last but very much not least, fresh water. I already mentioned that climate change is guaranteed to bring too much or too little, and often in the same area, and sometimes back to back, like one after the other, like we heard from Ukraine. And we will do a lot more to reduce the use of water, to reuse water, you know, for irrigation purposes, and also to help bring together water planners across borders, because a lot of the water bodies in Europe, you know, cross a lot of borders, and we need to work together so that, you know, those upstream are working together with those downstream. In terms of international action, this is a big novelty for the strategy. The one from 2013 was purely domestic in focused only on the EU, but we realized that you cannot adapt in isolation. You need to work with everybody else, especially since a lot of the climate impacts happening outside of Europe are immediately felt in the EU as well. There's this very famous case of flooding in Thailand, which within 2 days, I think, caused the price of computers in Europe to increase by 30%. And then we get health impacts as well. If there's a climate change induced health emergency in one country, it spills over. We all know the COVID-19 spread, which is basically unavoidable in our interconnected society. So that is why we pay a lot of attention. And if you look at the strategy, you will see that the international aspects take up a lot of space in the strategy. So I'll go in more detail one by one. The first action track on international is to increase the EU support to climate resilience. So we will help build capacity for data, for planning, and in this case, we would direct the assistance that we provide as the EU to our partners along the national plans, national adaptation plans, nationally determined contributions, biodiversity strategies, to really make our support strategic rather than case by case or just one project here, one project there. We will work a lot more with the plans and the strategies that you have. And then we'll help with structural reforms to make mainstreaming of adaptation much easier. We will have a lot of conflict prevention and mediation in our support because of the acknowledgement that adaptation is a huge intensifier of existing tensions and conflict. So that is why we will have a very conflict sensitive approach to adaptation, and we'll also target this approach to urban and informal settlements, and also work on global issues of cooperation, such as on ocean cooperation with the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Then in terms of finance, this is of course very important for a lot of the union's partners. You probably know this reality that a lot of the climate finance, a huge part of the climate finance goes to mitigation, but the Paris Agreement has stated that it should be on parity with adaptation. And the union is already providing more than 50% for adaptation as well as mitigation. And this on an overall increase of climate finance that the union and its member states continue to do. But this is just a drop in the ocean. The Global Commission on Adaptation estimates that at the global level, we need 10 times more funding for adaptation than is currently available. So that is why what the strategy will do is to try to bring in innovative financial resources and facilitate access of our partners to these available funds. We will work a lot more with the private sector and the multilateral development banks to get more of this funding, in addition to the one that the union directly provides, to get more of this funding for adaptation. And we will also climate proof the support that we give. So for instance, if we are to support one of our partners to build a highway, for instance, we will make sure that that highway not only is able to function in today's weather, but it also in tomorrow's climate. And as you know, temperatures are rising and the asphalt is melting at the point. We have 40-degree temperatures today, but we will have 42, 43 in 5 years' time. So all of this needs to be thought in when building infrastructure. And the last component is really to step up our global engagement on adaptation. We're not starting from scratch. We've already invested a lot in helping our partners adapt, but through the strategy, we are putting it in a single framework and also making sure that we have exchanges. It's no longer just the union providing support, but we also want to learn from our partners. And a lot of you have already a lot of experience with adaptation, be it in mountainous regions with glaciers melting, or with droughts and flooding, and all of this, we all need to learn from each other. So we will have structured dialogues, these two-way exchanges on adaptation. We will also support and become much more proactive, the EU, in global adaptation initiatives, such as those developed by the UN or in run-up to the COP26 meeting in Glasgow this year. And also, we will focus on trade agreements and all of the transboundary relations that we have on spillover effects, and also on maladaptation, when one region adapts but simply passes on the effects to another. And this is important because of supply chains, because of the investment flows, because of migration as well, climate change adding a lot of pressure to that. So with this, I will close. Thank you for listening. Thank you also for sharing. As I mentioned, I was listening from the beginning, and it was really informative for me as well. And I'm very happy to answer any questions